Hello everyone, today we're going to continue our conversation on quadratics by learning how to graph these. So we're going to talk about graphing y equals ax squared plus c, but we're going to start with when a is just equal to 1. So really we're looking at when y equals x squared plus c. So there are going to be basically 3 steps that we follow to graph these. My first step is I'm going to find the vertex. So if you remember, to find your x-coordinate, that's going to be the opposite of b over 2a that we talked about yesterday. And then to find the y, I'm going to plug that into my equation. Next, I'm going to plug in 2 numbers above and below my x value of the vertex into the function. So just 2 above and below whatever number you get here. And then I'm going to plot the points and connect them with a curve. So we're going to start with graphing f of x equals x squared. And we call this our parent function. So it is just when everything else is 0 except for 1 in front of my x squared. If you remember, we also talked about parent functions when we were doing linear graphs, and that function was f of x is just equal to x. So my first step is I'm going to find my vertex. So I need to do x equals the opposite of b over 2a. So looking at that function, I need to determine what my a, my b, and my c is. Well, the a is the number in front of my x squared. Here there really isn't one, so it means there's just really a 1 there. I don't have a b or c term, so that means that b is 0 and c is 0. So plugging those into here, that means my opposite of b, well, b is just 0, so that means opposite of 0, over 2a, which we found to be 1. Well, 0 divided by anything is just going to be 0, so that means that x is equal to 0 here. So that means for my vertex, that first coordinate is going to be 0. Now to find my y-coordinate, I'm going to plug in 0 into my function. So I have f of 0 is equal to, well, instead of x squared, I'm going to have 0 squared. And well, 0 squared is just 0. So that means my vertex is at 0, 0. Now my next step, I'm going to put this into a table. And I'm going to put this point into the middle. And now I'm going to pick 2 numbers below and above 0 to also plug into my function, just like what I did up here. So the easiest thing to do when you're starting from 0 is to have -1, -2, 1, and 2. And now I'm going to plug these numbers into this function. So first I'm going to plug in -2. So I have -2 squared. Careful here, since I'm squaring it, I need to put this -2 in parentheses. So when you're putting this in your calculator, you need to make sure you have parentheses around your -2, because that way you'll get your right answer. So -2 squared gets me a positive 4. And I'm going to do the same thing with my -1. Plug in my -1. Again, since it's negative, I need those parentheses because my base is really -1. So I have -1 times -1, which gives me a positive 1. I already have my 0. I need to plug in 1 into there, so I have 1 squared, which gets me 1. And then same thing with my 2. And 2 squared gets me 4. And now I'm going to plot all of those points. So when you're looking at this, this really means I have the point -2, 4, -1, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, and 2, 4. So plotting those points, -2, well, let's start with our vertex. Vertex is 0, 0. Then I have up 1, or cross 1, up 1. And then 2, 4. And then I'm also going to plug in those other points. So I have -1, 1, and then -2, 4. And so something that you should notice here is my vertex is the lowest point, which that should always be the case, or the highest point. and my other points are reflected on each other. So I see that these 2 points are at exactly the same y value. They're just opposite of each other from my axis of symmetry. And same thing with these 2 points. They're reflected. They're both the same distance from this axis, or my axis of symmetry. And so that's going to be the case every time. So that's one way that you can check yourself to see that you're doing it correctly. Okay, let's try one more. So this one says the graph g of x equals x squared minus 3. So now I have another part to it. And I want to compare the graph to the graph of f of x equals x squared. And so again, that is the parent function. So when you get to your homework, it's going to ask you to do this. So I want to go ahead and graph that parent function that we just did and have it on here so I can easily compare it to this new function that we're going to graph. Okay, so first step, I need to find my vertex. So I need my x equals opposite of b over 2a. So here again, my a is just equal to 1. B is the number in front of my x term. I don't have an x term, so that means that b is just 0. And then my c term is going to be this negative 3. So plugging those in, my b again is just 0. My a is 1. Well, 0 divided by 2 is just 0. So I get x equals 0. So I know that my vertex is starting with 0. And then I need to find my y coordinate. So to find my y, I need to plug in 0 into my function. So instead of x, I'm going to have 0 squared and still have my minus 3. Well, 0 minus 3, that just gets me negative 3. So that means my vertex is at 0, negative 3. And then now I'm going to create my chart again. So I have x and g of x. I'm going to put my vertex in the middle, so I have 0, negative 3. I'm going to pick 2 points above and below that x coordinate, so I have negative 1, negative 2, then 1 and 2. And then now I'm going to plug those values into my function here to find my g of x. So I want to start with negative 2. Again, I have a negative, so I need to put parentheses around. And so negative 2 squared, that's negative 2 times negative 2, which is 4. And 4 minus 3 gets me 1. Plugging in negative 1, so I have negative 1 squared, which is 1, minus 3 gets me negative 2. Plugging in 1, I have 1 squared, which is 1, minus 3 gets me negative 2 again. And then 2 squared minus 3 gets me 1. So again, you notice these two match, and then those two match, and that's going to be the case every time. And so now plotting those points, my vertex is at 0, negative 3. So that means I'm just going down 3 on my x-axis, or my y-axis. My next one, I have 1, negative 2, so I go 1, down 2. And then I have 2, 1, so I go to the right 2 and up 1. This point I'm at negative 1, negative 2. And then negative 2, 1. So again, remember, these are all just points on your graph. And then I'm going to draw my curve. And so there's my graph of g of x equals x squared minus 3. Now I want to compare it to the graph of f of x equals x squared, or my parent function. And something that I notice here is that I basically have the same graph. I'm just going down 3. So from each of these points, so like from my vertex, I went down 3 from that. From this point, I went down 3. And I'll see that is going to be the case for all of my points. And so when I compare this graph, all I can say is that that it just goes down 3. And so that's going to be the case every time. So if I were to do, for instance, if I was going to add 3 instead from this parent function, all I would do is just go up 3 from my vertex and from my other points. And that would be how I would graph that one. So that plus C, which is my last slide here, is that the C is just going to move the graph up or down. Okay, and that's it for today. Your homework is going to be on big ideas.